Welcome to the Contagious Code Podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I am Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today, my guest is Brandon Bayer, the co-founder of Flightcontrol and the author of Blitz.js. Flightcontrol is a platform where you can deploy your websites using your own AWS account. So it's a bring your own cloud model. Contrary to how Vercel, Netlify, and Cloudflare have you deploy to Vercel, Netlify, and Cloudflare, and they use AWS or Cloudflare, whatever it may be under the hood. You pay them, and that's it. In a way, they're your cloud. With Flightcontrol, you bring your own cloud, meaning you use your own AWS account and they give you a nice user interface on top of it. In our discussion, Brandon and I go deep into the details of how this works, how the model is maybe superior, and how it can help users at the end of the day. It's worth noting that I'm an investor in Flightcontrol, so I just want to be transparent about that because it is one of my portfolio companies and I do have a vested interest in it. However, I'm not, evangelizing go use it or whatever. I just want to talk to the founder about how it works so that you can understand some of its great technical details. And indeed, some of them are really great. If you're interested in cloud computing, the models, the deployment cloud models of Vercel, Netlify, Cloudflare, and or Flightcontrol, this episode should be very interesting for you. It's not even just DevOps heavy, it's the whole flow, right? How does a website go from GitHub to some type of build system to the internet? Well, in our discussion, we sort of navigate that path together. I'd like to offer this to all of you at no cost. Of course, there are costs involved, and this is very much separate to my day job. The way we can do that is through sponsors. Let's take a moment to acknowledge the sponsors and partners of the Contagious Code Podcast. The Contagious Code Podcast is partnered with Code Crafters. I have a way of teaching that is very similar to Code Crafters. With Code Crafters, after you log in, you can use a programming language like TypeScript, Python, Scala, Kotlin, and implement things that you use every day from scratch in that language, things like Git and Redis, Docker, etc. This way, you learn the programming language a little bit better, and you learn the underlying mechanisms that drive these tools we use every day. If you'd like to understand how they work, I'd recommend using Code Crafters. They have a free tier, but if you want up to a 40% discount, then use the link in the show notes to get there. That link is tej.as. That's my name, tej.as/codecrafters. The Contagious Code Podcast is also partnered with That Conference. That conference happens twice a year, once in Texas, once in Wisconsin in the United States. And it's just a multidisciplinary tech conference with some of the greatest people around. Kent C. Dodds is keynoting this Wisconsin conference that's happening in a few weeks after the point of recording. If you'd like to attend that for free, then share this episode on social media, say you want to go to that conference, and you'll enter a raffle to win that ticket. Finally, the Contagious Code Podcast is partnered with Stately.ai. Stately is a way to visualize the flow of application logic through your application, or how your state changes through states and the transitions that trigger them. It's a visual tool that then becomes code that you can use to visualize and understand the application flow of your logic, but also you can fill in the business logic in the transitions saying how to get from state A to state B in your specific application. They also have tools for creating autonomous AI agents with guardrails, so they work predictably and deterministically. If all of this or any of this sounds interesting, go to stately.ai. There's also a link in the show notes. Thank you for sticking around, and now for my discussion with Brandon Bayer. Brandon Bayer, what an honor to have you on the Contagious Code Podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
We go back, I think about two years or so, right? We met at React Miami some time ago, and you were just starting out Flightcontrol, which we'll talk about. And you've been obviously highly involved in open source before that with Blitz.js and so on. There's familiarity between you and I that I'm thankful for, but for the listeners who maybe haven't yet heard of you, could you do like a little bit of an introduction to just orient people, and then we'll form the basis of a discussion from there.
Sure. So I'm a software engineer and airplane and helicopter pilot. I started out in electrical engineering and then did embedded software, then got into web programming with Ruby on Rails. Did some mobile apps with React Native, did some consulting for a while, and eventually grew frustrated with the JavaScript ecosystem. I really missed the developer experience that I had with Ruby on Rails. And so I set out to try to bring a Ruby on Rails style experience to JavaScript by creating Blitz.js, which was kind of a wrapper around Next.js. And that got a bunch of initial traction. It's over like just like 13,000 GitHub stars now, thousands of people using it around the world. It's since kind of lost its mojo to some extent, but that led to me starting Flight Control, and that's what I'm working on today.
How does that make you feel that it lost its mojo? I mean, it's not every day you hear the creator of an open source project go like, "Yeah, it's lost its mojo." Do you feel sad about it? Do you feel relieved that you don't have to maintain it all the time?
It is, yeah, it's sad, because I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve, and I think the reality is JavaScript ecosystem is just so complex, with the front end stuff, the server side stuff, the integrations, that it's just really really freaking hard to have like a full stack framework, because there's just so much complexity that, like even Vercel has an entire team working on Next.js, which is just like the front end thing, and they still can't even keep up, like with what us users want from that. And so it's just too much to do all of that. And then also, there's most JavaScript devs just want to piece their world together from scratch instead of having a framework. As much as, people are like, oh yeah, I would love a framework, when it comes down to it, they would rather not have a framework.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because frameworks toe the line between control and convenience. Like Next.js has opinions, for example, about how you do your directory structure and so on, and maybe you don't want to do that. And they do give you a bit of flexibility, like do you want the src directory or not? But ultimately, you give up some control, so you have convenience. And as developers, depending on the level of experience, maybe you don't want to give up that much control. Like you said, you want to wire your world together from scratch.
Yeah, I think the problem with JavaScript is that it's so fast changing, and it's just always something new. And so frameworks cannot keep up.
Yeah.
Whereas other languages like Ruby and PHP and things, they don't change as fast. And so the frameworks are like, they're basically keeping up. So it's just a different nature.
Yeah, and to maintain all of that as one person for Blitz.js, I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. So
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's
there was contributors and things, but still, ultimately, it was me, without any funding or anything. I'm just like, for it had been 1 to 2 years that I was working on Blitz. I was spending about 20 to 30 hours a week on Blitz and like 20 hours a week consulting.
wow. And yeah, and even with a community, I feel like that's a lot of effort.
Yeah.
Okay, so since Blitz lost its mojo, are you interested in reviving that mojo, or is it just handed off to the community, like you guys maintain it? I'm going to build flight control.
So it's basically in maintenance mode. We are continuing to update. We've updated it for server components. We've updated it for Turbo, Turbo Pack,
Yeah,
is the new bundler. So Flight Control is using it, and I really can't imagine using anything else. Like the experience of the Blitz queries and mutations is just so good, and the Blitz authentication is so good. So we're continuing to maintain it, but yeah, that's basically the extent of it. Don't expect any like major new innovations.
This is what you just said echoes Guillermo Rausch from Vercel, who we had on the podcast, and he talks about like using the thing he makes as being the ultimate gift as an open source author, but also as a founder, like eating his own dog food. And I hear you talking about using Blitz and Flight Control, and I have to imagine it's the same. Like you improve it for yourself and it meets your needs. It maybe doesn't need to meet the whole world's needs, and that's okay. Cool. I kind of like that it landed there, because you'll probably experience some problems as you grow Flight Control, and the problems that you solve are solved automatically for everyone else, right? That's the whole beauty of open source.
Yep.
We've been mentioning Flight Control a few times. Let's talk about it. Can you maybe introduce Flight Control? What is Flight Control? Why does it exist? How does it get money? Do you have product market fit, etc.?
Yep. Flight Control is a platform as a service for deploying production applications to your own AWS account. And because we deploy to your own AWS account, it allows us to provide a level of reliability flexibility and performance that you cannot get with other platforms as a service.
Because it's your own AWS account. So
Yes.
how is it a platform as a service if AWS is the platform as a service that you use?
So AWS is infrastructure as a service.
Hmm.
It's very low level primitives, infrastructure primitives, but you still need some type of platformer on top of that, either something homegrown. There's traditional platforms that completely abstract AWS away.
Like
But
Vercel.
Flightcontrol, yep. But Flightcontrol is a new approach that provides the platform as a service developer experience you're used to. So it's very easy to use, but now it deploys to your own AWS account. And so you get back the ownership and the control and the flexibility and the reliability of native AWS. So you kind of get the best of both worlds.
Awesome. So it feels like to the developer a full wrapper on AWS, but it's actually not. All of the AWS lower level primitives are just exposed to you in a maybe nicer way. Is that accurate?
Yes, pretty much. So AWS, if you've tried to use it, it's very low level. And so, to deploy a web server, you need to connect 5 to 15 different primitives together in just the right way. And if you've done that before, like it's not, extremely hard, but it's still time consuming. You need to spin up a new service. It's hard to do that. And so a lot of people are like, hey, I need something easier. So we fully automate that for you. So it's just like add a server, add a static site, add a database, and we do all the hard work for you.
That's so cool. I have to say, I have used Flightcontrol, so all of this is just in favor of the listeners. But let's maybe talk about this so that the listeners fully appreciate how complex AWS is to use. So what I'll tell you is how I would go about just deploying a Node.js server to AWS and exposing it to the web. And you can tell me maybe what I missed and what the equivalent outcome, how the equivalent outcome would be achieved on Flightcontrol. So if I'm just using AWS per my latest knowledge, which it's been a while because at Spotify we used to use Google Cloud, I would find some type of VM or containerized service in which I can execute my node server. That's the first thing. That would be either Fargate or EC2 on AWS. But then I have this running VM or container, but I don't have a load balancer in front of it. So then I have to go to like ALB or ELB, which is Elastic Load Balancer, Application Load Balancer, and expose this thing's private IP to the internet. Okay, cool. Now I have an exposed IP, but I need to add a domain to it. So then I need to go to Route 53, and I need to register a domain and attach the associated name servers. And then I've got to probably get also a static IP for my EC2 instance so that the DNS mapping is constant. And it's not like if the EC2 or Fargate instance gets a new IP, then my domain doesn't resolve to the same IP and it's a whole problem. So those are some layers. There's probably, if I want to be really secure about it, I'll have my EC2 or Fargate container in a private subnet and my load balancer in a public subnet and have it proxy incoming requests to that. So this is some of the complexity. Does that accurately capture how difficult it is just to get a node server exposed? And what did I miss?
Yep, that's definitely accurate. And then you also probably want a CDN. So either
of course.
CloudFront or Cloudflare,
or S3.
Yeah, and then you have the database. And then if you want the database to be public or private, then you have to connect that to the network that your server is running in. If you're doing a build like a Next.js build that builds things statically from the database, then your build server needs to have access to your database.
Yeah, that sounds like a huge pain. And with Flightcontrol, what's the equivalent? How would I go about deploying the same Node.js service with Flightcontrol? Do I just run a command like npx Flightcontrol new server, hit enter, done? Is there a CLI or is it more graphical where I could just click a button and it's done?
We don't have a CLI yet, but today you log into our dashboard, connect your GitHub repo, and then select server, and then it'll probably automatically build for you. You may need to adjust the build or start commands depending on your setup, or you can bring a custom Docker file if you want. And then, click create, and then Flightcontrol will automatically provision either the Fargate service for you or the ECS and EC2. It'll automatically add the CDN for you, automatically handle all the networking, and then also the custom domains. You can easily configure a custom domain.
Wow. All of this obviously happens behind the scenes. How are you all doing that? Is it some type of, this sounds very like rule-based AI. Are you all using like Terraform or something to create new files and then provision the infrastructure? Is it something bespoke? Is this the secret sauce that you can't talk about?
No, it's not so secret. We use CloudFormation, a CloudFormation stack to create the initial service. And so that's kind of how we set up all the initial infrastructure. And then after that, CloudFormation is too slow. And so we surgically update the AWS configuration and things for each deployment with their API. And so we
Wow.
completely bypass the CloudFront beyond the initial provisioning.
To build something like this, you've got to be well versed in AWS's low level primitives. Is this something you were doing like in your consulting role before starting Flightcontrol, and you were like, this is so painful, there has to be a solution?
No, in fact, I'm still an AWS noob. There's no
What?
way I could build this. So this is Mina, my co-founder and CTO. He's the AWS wizard. He's been using AWS since S3 and EC2 were all they had. And so he's incredible at building this stuff.
Wow, yeah, sounds like it. I have to assume this is, I'm curious about the business model of a product like this, right? And for the reason being, I remember GraphCool a long time ago that eventually pivoted and became Prisma, the company today. And GraphCool was just a hosted database with a GraphQL API in front of it. Eventually encountered problems at scale, particularly the noisy neighbor problem where it was shared infrastructure. Now, obviously, with Flightcontrol, you don't have that because you run on not shared, so dedicated infrastructure based on a user's AWS account. However, there was a season in the arc of like software engineering where there were these providers that would allow you to just run hosted containers in the cloud. Heroku, for one, DigitalOcean, I think, had some droplets, and all of these had a reputation for being way too expensive. Even back in the day, like Vercel had Zeit, and they had a thing called Now, which also did that, and it was way too expensive and unsustainable. And then Lambda came around, and everybody was like, "Oh, this is so much cheaper because it's per execution." How are y'all managing to keep that sustainable? Is it sustainable? Because it seems like it would pay for itself because people just pay AWS; they don't pay you. But then, as a business, you've got to earn money. So, could we maybe speak to the sustainability and pricing of that?
Yep. So you basically have, two aspects here. You have the business, the platform needs to make money somehow, and then you have the compute cost that needs to be paid for. So, traditional platforms as a service that fully abstract AWS, a lot of those are charging like $20 per user, plus charging for compute, and that compute is actually a markup over AWS. And so they're making money on the per user cost, and they're making money on the markup above the infrastructure cost. So for Flightcontrol, it's because of the flexibility of how we deploy, we can't track users easily. And so instead of charging per user, we charge per service. And so you basically pay Flightcontrol per service, and then you pay AWS the raw usage cost. So how it plays out is using Fargate. Fargate is like one of the more expensive AWS services. And so the Fargate compute cost is roughly equivalent to a platform as a service compute cost. But we also have the EC2 version, which is currently in preview. And that allows you to get, it's much cheaper than Fargate. And you can actually, using reserved instances, it can be 50% or more cheaper than a traditional platform as a service.
Wow.
So your compute cost, especially as you scale, can be much cheaper on AWS because there's no markup with Flightcontrol.
Yeah. So you'll offer,
but we continue to make the revenue on the service side.
And is it some type of like $20 per service, or
so it starts at $49. That includes 5 services.
Okay.
And then it's $15 per service beyond that. And then the business plan is $249 per month, which includes 10 services, and then $30 per service beyond that.
That sounds actually really cool. Like I would I would definitely, if I was a business that needed to scale, I would go straight to flight control. Because like for I'd say small to medium scale, I think I'm okay using something like Netlify or Vercel, but I do imagine like at high throughput workloads, this stuff adds up, and it's not uncommon, right? You see a lot of people, they'll find product market fit, maybe start with some investment and credits on something like Vercel or Netlify or Cloudflare, but at some point the costs go so high that they go like, oh, we need to avoid this markup somehow. And then they'll probably invest in a ton of salaries to find the right people to do it on AWS, or they'll go on a full-on like Hetzner machine and get a VPS, also which comes with its own trade-offs. There was some traction on X, Twitter recently, where people were even talking about this. They say, "Oh, Vercel's way too expensive. You're better off just using a VPS." Um, could we maybe talk about that? The intersection between, self-hosting with a VPS or using something like flight control.
Yeah. And before I go into that, you mentioned, like being at small scale, it's fine to use any kind of platform as a service is going to work. But as you reach some sort of scale, then you're probably going to need AWS. The surprising thing is that people hit that point way before they think they're going to. Like it's actually not that high of scale before you start hitting the limitations of a platform as a service, either from reliability or cost. And so we often have people migrating from Fly, from Vercel, from Render Railway because they hit these issues. And they're still like relatively small startups.
What are can I ask? I mean, I did ask you a question, but like, what now? I'm interested in this. What are some of those issues? You mentioned reliability. Like, do the services just fall over? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
as
Like we had a couple of
what?
people migrate from Fly this week because Fly was having an outage. And so these are businesses that are, they're down and they're like, they're not serving their customers. And they're like, this can't work. We need something reliable. And AWS is the most reliable infrastructure you can get.
Wow. I had no idea that these businesses or the providers just have outages just like that. And then of course there's SLAs and they have to compensate them and so on. But that's wild. Okay, but you could also recover from or control outages better if you use a VPS, that is a virtual private server, and build it yourself, right?
Yeah.
And then
So
also arguably the costs are lower. So
the problem is with the platform as a service is that they have a shared layer of infrastructure between you and the underlying, infrastructure, whether it's AWS or whatever. And so it's a multi-tenant infrastructure. You have all this traffic for all their customers going through this thing, and all software has bugs, and so you're going to have problems. Whereas with something like flight control or VPS, like you have your own dedicated infrastructure. It's not shared. Like it's just your infrastructure. And so there's no custom software there. Like even in flight control, our custom software is just automating the infrastructure. At runtime, it's just pure AWS. And so you get the reliability there.
interesting. So y'all completely get out of the way, it sounds like. It's almost like y'all, if we liken this to the real physical world, it's like you guys show up with hard hats and scaffolding and like build a big building, and once it's habitable, you just leave and let everything just run
Yes,
autonomously.
but then we just bring in another crew that will like operate the front desk and like make sure that new guests can come in and out and your deployment's working. We automate that part too.
Wow.
But
That's so cool. I have to say the design is also really cool. Like the dashboards and everything. It's one of the best UIs I've ever seen on the web. And I think what's the agency? There was an agency in Berlin that did
Overnice
this, right?
in Berlin. Yeah,
Overnice.
yeah, they did Prisma's branding as well.
Yeah, it's really really cool. I especially like the button hover effects. If y'all haven't tried out Flight Control, I'd recommend it. And yes, full disclosure, I'm an investor or whatever. This is not insider trading. I like the product. Okay. So with VPS, you have more control. But is the trade-off just that it's easier to get wrong then? And with Flight Control, you all sort of take on some of that risk.
So a VPS is a virtual private server. It is, when you talk about VPS, you're talking about like literally a single computer in the cloud. Like it's just
Yeah.
one computer. And you can get these very cheap, like especially if you go through Hetzner or something, like you can get incredible price performance. but it's a single box. And so if that server crashes, your site's gone. And so, like that is a risk, but many sites run on a VPS. Like a lot of WordPress sites run on a single VPS, and it works fine. Levels.io runs like a bunch of startups on a VPS, and so servers are mostly Linux is reliable, and so usually it's not a problem. But so this is often a good fit for hobbyists. So if you have a whole bunch of side projects you want to run, you can run like 100 sites on a $5 VPS versus like if you had what did I say 100 sites? If you had 100 sites on Render paying like $7 per site, like that's really expensive.
Yeah.
And so because your usage for these side projects are going to be so small, you can pack them all into a single VPS very, very easy. But as a scaling business where you have employees and you're hiring and people are leaving, you have to hire more people, like that is, you don't want to manage that. Like you want it to be rock solid, reliable. You don't want to have to worry about the server going offline. And so that's where it's not so good of a fit for like a full startup.
Mm. Yeah, and also if you wanted to distribute the load, I guess you would get like 3 different Hetzner services. So then your costs add up anyway because it's 3x what you pay with the $5, and then you've got to run Kubernetes on them, and you've got to orchestrate all of that yourself. It's a pain.
Yep.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that. So Flightcontrol recently has been putting out some really, really great technical content, I must say. You talk about migrating to and then away from the Next.js app router. You talk about migrating from PlanetScale to AWS Aurora. You talk about even shipping some new features like cron jobs. I will say this, my one feature request for all your competitors, so Cloudflare, Vercel, Netlify, is one you have, and this is the best case for me for Flightcontrol, which is like arbitrarily long-running function invocations. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Because like I do a lot of web scraping for various AI use cases. I actually pulled every post Dan Abramov has ever made ever. So that's like 85,000 things, and it's ongoing. It runs every day and just gets more. And I can do that on Flightcontrol because it could take 10 minutes. The first crawl of Dan's profile took 36 hours. It just ran because I get rate limited by Twitter, and I have a whole backup. Like it's a whole thing. Anyway, I can run that for 36 hours or 36 seconds on Flightcontrol. It's really cool. Can we talk about some of those things? So let's maybe start with talking about the fact that y'all build Flightcontrol on Flightcontrol. Is that true? Like, is the infrastructure for Flightcontrol provisioned by Flightcontrol?
It is.
Wow, that's so cool. Okay. Is there content about this? If not, there should
No.
be. Oh man, come on, dude. What are you doing? Okay. Second, y'all used to use PlanetScale, I believe, as your data layer, and now you moved to AWS Aurora. This is probably furthering that effort of Flightcontrol running on Flightcontrol. But I know that Flightcontrol, at least at the time that I used it, didn't support AWS Aurora. It supported RDS, which RDS is, you can choose Aurora with RDS, right? I'm maybe showing my knowledge gaps here. So was that part of the reason? Like we want to be self-dependent, and that's why we're moving from PlanetScale to Aurora, or was there more to it?
The reason we started using PlanetScale in the first place was it was marketed as a serverless database. So you just connect to it, and you don't have to worry about scaling or instance sizes for your databases. It's just serverless, right? But they ended up moving away from that, and now they're no longer serverless. So you have to specifically choose an instance size and monitor the CPU and memory of that database. If it's hitting limits, then you have to upgrade the instance. And we were like, we don't want to do this anymore. And secondly, we wanted to have a private database. So we wanted to no longer be publicly available on the internet, but to be behind a private network. And you can only get this on the enterprise plan for PlanetScale. So this is one of those limitations with platform as a service that almost you have to be on an enterprise plan to get the private database, which is frustrating. But with Flightcontrol, because of your own AWS, you get that for free. So that was really the motivation. So we switched to Aurora, which is serverless. So it'll automatically scale up and down for you. It has been a little bit more expensive, and it's
probably cheaper than the enterprise plan,
yes,
though, of
yes,
PlanetScale.
for sure. Okay. Yeah. and it has taken a little bit more hand holding and fine tuning to really get the experience that we had on PlanetScale, where like things are just working well. Um, so like there's definitely trade-offs there. We don't support it through Flightcontrol yet, but the beauty is that it's in AWS, so it easily integrates with the Flightcontrol managed services until we had that as a first class thing.
That's so cool. And since you're already using it at Flight Control, this is probably already a closed source service that is just not yet exposed in Flight Control because it's already in use in production. So
No, it's not part of Flightcontrol, the product yet. It's
what?
just
Okay.
we just went into AWS. I'm not sure if it's managed through IEC or whatever, but you just create it,
Right.
and then connect it to your Flight
Yeah.
Control services.
That's so raw, but so cool. What were some of the technical challenges with doing? Because I assume in PlanetScale you had a ton of data, right? You've been using it in production for a good while.
We don't have that. We have a pretty small database, all things considered.
But you have users, right? You have
Yes.
accounts.
Yes.
You have
Yeah, but we're not like B2C. We don't have like billions of records. Like we just have deployments and like so it's there are a lot of other businesses that have a lot higher data needs than we do.
Okay, so it sounds like it was seamless. How did you go about it? Did you write a piece, just a script, and like move it over,
or? Mina did this migration, so I can't really speak too much to it. But I believe you basically, I imagine how you typically do it is do an export of your data and then import it into the new thing.
Wow, but that comes with downtime for your
A little bit,
customers, no?
yeah.
Okay.
And so we had a scheduled downtime. We emailed them like, hey, it's going to be down for this, and we did it on a weekend, so it's very a low usage time.
That's so cool.
If you need zero downtime, you can do it. It's just a lot more complex. And so thankfully we didn't have to do that.
Fantastic. I must say I really appreciate how y'all are so intentional of like living the Flight Control sort of mantra, which is reducing costs and being as efficient and as lean as possible. And that's what you enable developers to do by selling these AWS services at cost. You've also talked about how you reduce the GitHub Actions usage by a significant amount, 63%, I think it was. And I think most everyday developers won't even know this unless they're a company running on GitHub, but actions can get quite expensive, right? You pay for execution minutes, and if your developers are not careful with the actions they deploy, it can add up. Can we start by talking about just the potential high cost of GitHub Actions before we talk about the solution? Like, what problems did y'all face that y'all had to go like, oh, we need to fix this?
So our main issue was just the time and having to wait on CI runs to run like on a PR where like nothing changed on that thing, but we still have to wait for it because we have a mono repo. So we have it's like 6 or 7 different packages and checks that run. And if I only change one, I don't want to wait for the others. So that was the main thing. So our engineer Camila just found this community GitHub action that allows you to easily kind of define that only certain checks will only run if certain files have changed. And so package A will only run, the check for package A will only run if that package changed or some of its dependencies. So ended up saving I think the numbers we were paying, like it might have been $300 or $400 per month we were paying for GitHub Actions. So it's, in grand scheme of things, it's not that much. But GitHub Actions it's expensive and slow for the native compute you get. So doing this optimization, reduced some costs. It reduced the time we have to wait for PRs. We've since started using Warp, which is a drop-in replacement for GitHub Actions compute. So in your GitHub Actions file where you have like runs on and then like Ubuntu latest or something, you literally just switch that out with runs on Warp something up, and it will just use a third-party server for that. And so that is actually, I'm not sure if it's, I think we're paying about the same now, but getting faster performance. We could pay more to get even more performance. So it's kind of a trade-off there, how much you want to pay versus how fast you want them to be. But it is working pretty well.
This is so cool. Is Warp like another company that
It's a
gives you a
yes, it's a
faster
startup.
runtime?
Yep.
That's so cool.
Yep.
I have to get whoever founded that. We need to get them on the show and just ask, like, where did this idea come from? Like, I'm going to start a runs-on runner for GitHub Actions. Gosh, that's so innovative. That is so cool. Okay, so it sounds like the bigger cost saving really than money was developer time and developer productivity and
Yep.
happiness.
Yep.
And you'd say that's a worthy trade-off for listeners.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Let's talk about errors. I've used flight control, and sometimes I received some errors that were hard to understand. I think also, to be fair, TypeScript has this reputation for saying things that people don't understand. I've actually been guilty of like copying a big long TypeScript error, pasting it into ChatGPT, and going like, make it make sense. I think Matt Pocock has a TypeScript error translator where you paste the TypeScript compiler error and then it becomes English. So with all of that context, I know you're well familiar with TypeScript because of Blitz and all of your talks. Could we talk about the importance of error handling for developers and for end users, probably using flight control as a case study?
Yeah, so we're basically an error handling product. Like, I think someone tweeted recently about how like every business has a forever problem. Like it's just this thing that you never solve. It's just a constant battle. For us, I think it's edge cases. There's just going to be an endless amount of edge cases that we run into, and most of those result in some type of error. And so, we, especially for having developers as users, we need to have errors that are very clear, that's understandable about like how do you fix it, whether it's a link to documentation or something. So it's with a complex distributed system, you have to have some way to really capture these errors and display them. So we wrote a blog post on how we do this. We basically have an error field in the database on every model. So like a project has an error field, the environment has an error field, a service, a deployment, a service deployment. And then we have this structure where we kind of built this internal library that will allow you to easily create the errors at the source. So like you have a try catch, you're doing something, you catch it, and then you create a custom error. We have a custom error, and then you can save that. It's a normalized format that you can save in the database with like has a code, and then like any metadata about that you need, like a certain error code or a certain value that was not accepted.
Would the message qualify also, probably?
Depending on what it is, yes. And so we store that in the database, and then we have another part of this error library that will read that value from the database and convert it into a pretty display error. And so this is where, so this allows us to customize the errors that are displayed without changing what's in the database. So we can, this is where, so that you can add like links in there, change whatever is there. So that works really well. Right now, we have a lot of errors that we have these custom first class errors for. So we display it nicely. There's others that we don't have a first class error for, but we basically just pass it straight through to the user, whatever we're getting from AWS. A lot of times those are more cryptic, but still the information is there. And then there's others where it's like completely unexpected. Like it's probably something on a bug in our system that is not going to be helpful for you at all. And in those cases, we just display, say, hey, there's an unhandled error, contact support.
That sounds really thoughtful. I especially like the separation of concerns of storing like some type of code in the database and then formatting based on the code in the UI. I can see how that can scale really well. And also this really invalidates my whole suggestion of keeping the message in the database earlier, right? That doesn't make any sense because the message can change depending on who's logged in and what system they're accessing it from and so on. Awesome. I used flight control and saw one of those errors that was completely useless to me, but it was, I think, a bug. So is this open source? Meaning, can somebody take this? You mentioned it's a framework. Can I take it and use it in my product or not yet?
Flightcontrol is not currently open source.
I don't mean flight control. I mean just this error
The
internal
error
library
thing.
that you talked about. Yeah.
So all the code for this is in the blog post that I shared. So you can literally copy and paste it for, yep. And
That's
so
awesome.
I'm a big fan of copy pasting code than libraries because it's there. Okay, you have a library. One, you have to you have to keep it updated. Otherwise, you're going to get these security alerts. Two is that it's probably not going to do. You're going to hit some edge case you don't want it to do, and so maybe you have to fork it, whatever. It's just so nice when you have the code in your repository and you can just write it to be exactly what you want. You can customize it. So I'm a big fan of the copy paste style.
Yeah, I think it's not just you. I think everybody's seeing this trend with Shad CN UI, for example, right?
Yep.
It's not npm install components. It's you generate them. You literally copy paste them. Yeah, I like that because I think this is also important for the listeners to know. There was a day in web dev when everybody and their mom was making a library, but now we've all sort of, I don't want to use the term grown up, but we sort of started to see libraries maybe aren't always the most sustainable for the reasons you mentioned. Awesome. Yeah, I look forward to copying and pasting that and maybe even teaching that to people because I think it's such a huge problem. Like Next.js, for example, has a pretty bad reputation for errors, I will say. Specifically the one about like there's a hydration mismatch and the server sent content doesn't match the client content. It's just a pain. And the thing about this error, right? One, it's hard to understand, but two, you can just dismiss it. And so it doesn't really affect anything on the surface. It does, of course, affect hydration, but not in a way that developers or users notice or care about. So getting errors right is so important. I know you've had some experiences with Next.js and these errors. Could we maybe talk about that? I know there's a blog post about this. We also had a PodRocket episode about this, but those people are not these people listening. And also they're going to hear about it now and go like, oh, you're making me go read a blog post. Why don't you just tell me? So for the folks, can we talk about that? Specifically, I'm talking about the rebuilding of your dashboard with the overnice redesign from pages to app router and then realizing, this is a bad idea. And going back.
So we actually kept App Router. We're still using App Router today.
Cool.
Yeah, so we never changed from it. So yeah, we have a blog post about a lot of the issues we had, and thankfully a lot of the things are actually have been somewhat addressed now. So after our last podcast on the PodRocket one, Tim from Vercel Next.js reached out and was doing like some in-depth debugging and it was very helpful and ended up making a PR to Blitz to add TurboPack support. So we have TurboPack support in Blitz now, although it's failing in our flight control code base. It's just like stuff doesn't work and I don't know. So hopefully as more people start using TurboPack, some of this stuff they'll fix more bugs, more edge cases.
Yeah.
But some of the issues we had was around errors being swallowed, not clear. A lot of that has been improved now.
So cool.
There's still some issues like you can't implement route exit animations. There's issues with the routing type safety, which I have a blog post that how we've done that in userland, added full type safety and validation. The big one was dev server performance was super slow.
Yeah.
So that has definitely been improved. And our last kind of big thing that's a problem here is that the Blitz query and mutation endpoint is still in the pages directory. Where the rest of our app is in the app directory. And so this is resulting in us compiling a lot of our code twice. Once for the app directory and one for the pages directory. Which I didn't know that until after this last podcast, Tim told us oh, you're compiling all your code twice. Oh, okay, that's good to know.
Why does it compile all the code twice? Why not just the stuff in the app directory once and just the stuff in the pages directory once?
Well, that's what it does. But most of our code is shared. Like we're using
Oh, I
like a lot
see.
of our queries and server side code, like we're like getting the initial data in the server component, and then
Yeah.
also fetching it on the client from a query, like for live updates or whatever.
Right.
So we're working on updating Blitz to support this endpoint being in the pages directory. So that will cut down our time by half. It was also had issues with crashes on the dev server, and that's been almost completely fixed. I haven't experienced that in a
Awesome.
while. So there's
This
definitely
is so good.
been good updates.
This I just have to say, this is so awesome to hear the positive outcome of our previous discussion on PodRocket. I was also like mentioned in the thread on X, and I was like, what are you picking me for? It's Brandon's issue. But then I'm so glad y'all talked about it. You fixed it. That's the best possible outcome. Like as the host of that episode, it's like so fulfilling. And hopefully, from this podcast, people end up learning how to do errors right, and how to save costs on GitHub Actions and all the other takeaways we're outlining here. That is so cool. One big sticking point for me and many of the engineers I've worked with in the past, actually, one name comes to mind. So I've got this friend. He's an engineer. I don't know that you've met him, but his name is Fabien Bernard. Really brilliant. One of the best TypeScript engineers I've ever worked with, ever, if not the best. And he refuses to use Next.js. He doesn't like it because of the routing. The blog post y'all wrote, the routing is just not type safe. It's very easy to like revalidate a path that is non-existent because those functions don't give you like completion for the routes. And it can lead to unsafe and potentially error-prone code. So y'all have a pattern, I believe. I don't think it's not a library, but a pattern for adding full type safety. And also not just type safety at build time, but validation at runtime for navigations and routes. Can we maybe talk about that a little bit? Where did that? I mean, I know that came from your love for type safety and Blitz and all of this, but what's the solution there? What was the moment that y'all went, this is good, we need to do it this way?
So one of the first things we did, or one of the early things we did with Blitz, was add a type safety layer for the routing. And we basically would, read all your pages and then generate this file, this routes file that would allow you to import the routes object. And then just everywhere you're doing a link, you do routes.pagename, and then
Right.
it's a function. And so you can pass in like the dynamic parameters like project ID or like search params or whatever. So whenever we moved to app router, like we didn't update Blitz to do that. And then also Next.js they have an experimental type routes feature. And so we're like, well, let's try that. So we tried that for some time, and it's really bad. It's way too many limitations. You don't have any type validation of the route and query parameters. You don't have any runtime validation. You don't get autocomplete for dynamic routes, which is kind of one of the most so it's, I don't know, there's probably a TypeScript limitation or an implementation issue. I don't know. But most of our routes are dynamic. They have parameters in them. And so when you're writing a link and you're writing the href, you want to be able to have autocomplete for that, but it doesn't work with the dynamic routes. So you just have to know what it is, put it in there, and then it'll tell you whether it's correct or not.
Interesting.
So yeah, we ended up basically building this tiny little library that you can copy and paste from our blog post. And
Nice.
we have to manually define all the routes in a file. It's not auto-generated, but you don't add routes very often. So it's totally fine to just manually add the routes. And then you're explicit about, okay, this is what the parameters it takes, this is the query parameters that you can use. And then the output of this is that you can use it in the server components input. You can use it for links, and basically everywhere that you're doing routing stuff.
How does that handle like nested routes? Because that's the whole thing with Next.js 13 onwards, right? It supports like route partials, route segments, nested routes, where it's not a whole route, but it's just like a piece of UI. Do you also then just be explicit about those in this
I'm
file?
not sure if Next.js supports like the partial routes in the links. Maybe they do or not, but we just use full routes everywhere.
Okay. Yeah. That sounds really great. I'd love to give it a try. Can you think of limitations with this? Like, does it give you trouble so far, or is it just like
It's
working
great.
perfectly? You have
Works great.
autocomplete everywhere, and
Yep.
that is so cool. We'll put a link to that in the show notes and check it out. I believe y'all created some content around shipping software, the principles of speed and batch sizes and automation and things like that. Um, would you be willing to elaborate on that? Mainly, I know y'all ship. It's no secret that flight control ships. Even fixes to I tried to deploy my website on flight control this one time, and it was fixed, and it actually is on some CloudFront URL somewhere. Even now, I don't think I deactivated. I'm probably paying for AWS somewhere. But what is the secret to shipping as effectively as flight control?
It's hard. Shipping is hard. Shipping as a like finding your way as a startup, as a team, is really difficult. There are so many competing priorities. You've got bugs to fix. You've got customers clamoring for new features that they need. You've got potential customers saying like, "Hey, like if you had this thing, then I would use you." And you have your own like things that like the vision that you want to build towards. So it's really tough. One thing that's really helped us is to make sure and focus on one thing at a time. Which, as I
Yeah.
say this, we have like 4 different projects in progress. But focusing on one thing at a time is so impactful if you can. So sometimes we have smaller projects where we have like half the team on one project, half the team on another. But if you have a small team and you can be all focused on one thing at a time, that's really helpful. Momentum is super important. So just making continual progress. And so a lot of this can be in the product process. So make sure that instead of, just building the entire thing and then like deploying it, like find the most minimal version and deploy that behind a feature flag and start using it, start testing it in production. And so that allows you to keep iterating even before it's like publicly released. And so that's something around the speed and the momentum.
Yeah. How big is the team?
We are 4 right now. 4, 5. We're 5.
Okay.
We're 5, and then a couple part-time contractors.
Do y'all have product people, or who does that role?
I'm the main product person. Although a lot of the other engineers like help influence the product. And one of the part-time contractors will, for bigger projects, we'll have him do the sort of the product management, sort of like collecting all of the requirements and really kind of laying out like the process for that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I'm the one kind of more or less driving the product.
What is the focus like right now? You said, have a single focus for a small team. What are y'all focusing on?
Right now, we're focusing on barriers to adoption. So maybe about a month ago, I tweeted like, "Hey, like, why would you not use flight control?"
Because it doesn't have a CLI.
We got a bunch of good feedback, and one of the people that replied was one of our customers, and they're like, "Hey, we absolutely love flight control, but I've been unable to convince anyone else to use it because you don't have role-based access control and SSO or 2FA." And I'm like, well, like
Hold my beer.
like those are two things that like, yeah, I know we need them, but it's just you keep pushing off and pushing off because we've got like actual real features to ship. Like who cares about this boring stuff? Turns out
Yeah.
a lot of people do. So there was a bunch of things that we're doing in a short time here. We implemented role-based access control. We're adding SSO. It's pretty much done. It's not quite shipped yet. That will allow people to enforce 2FA through Google or GitHub. We introduced new pricing. So we added a new low-cost plan, and like readjusted the prices. So it was $50 per service. But the problem is like, with like no base price. But the problem is that it's like reverse price anchoring. So you're like, okay, $50, okay, not so bad. But then you're like, well, okay, well, I need a server, I need a database, I need a cache, and then I have 2 environments, and now I'm like at 6 services, 6 times 50. Oh, that's like actually kind of expensive. And so now we have the $50 plan and a $250 plan that has 5 and 10 services included. And so it's like the number you see is like probably what you're going to start paying versus like you see the number and then you're going to actually be paying like 3 or 4x that.
Yeah.
So we've rolled that out. I am working on updating a marketing site, adding a lot of changes to like make it more clear, to make it more understandable about when you would use us, why you would use us, what we're best at, how we compare to other platforms, adding information about the AWS cost. So it's just even more clear before you sign up, like exactly what you're going to be paying or what you're going to get. The build system. So builds have been slow. It's been our most common customer complaint since probably day one. And we've been talking about, we have a new build system. It's coming. We're finally building it now.
Nice.
And this replaces code build with EC2 servers that will have basically a permanent disk. And so the problem with Cloud CI builds is that you have to download and upload the cache, which is slow. And then if you don't have the cache fully optimized, like you're not actually getting all of it. But the fastest build you can have is on your local computer because all the cache is there. You don't have to upload or download, right? You just run build, boom.
Yeah.
And so we're basically replicating that in the cloud. And so this is in progress right now. We will probably be able to test it ourselves next week. And so it should be available to users within a few weeks. And the last one is GPU support.
Oh,
so for AI workloads or video workloads, we now have GPU support available in preview. And so this is using ECS and plus EC2 instead of Fargate because Fargate does not support GPU.
In terms of removing barriers to adoption, it sounds like you're all doing amazing work. Like, first of all, just like listening and then executing. So huge, like hat tip to that. Is like for enterprise clients, it's pretty common that they look for something like SOC 2 compliance and HIPAA compliance and all of this. Is that also on the roadmap? Because I can imagine tons of enterprise customers who will just not even consider y'all if those aren't accounted for.
Yep. Turns out all our competitors have SOC 2 except for us. So we've also started working on SOC 2 as one of these things. We are getting close to being able to start our 3-month review period for SOC 2 Type 2.
Awesome. It sounds like with all of this, the next quarter is one that we should expect like a lot more adoption. But you can't get the adoption unless people know you exist. And for people to know you exist, you require marketing and or like relationship building, aka DevRel. Maybe it's worth spending some time talking about that because I know you've been focused on that. We talked a little bit before, and yeah, what's happening there? And look, that can that also be a focus since you said focus on one thing? Are you all focused on that right now? Or is the plan to actually remove all these barriers and then focus on it? That would be cool. I'll let you speak about the marketing side.
So even if you end up doing multiple things as a company, if each person can be focused fully on one thing, then I think that's a lot of it. So like right now, my focus is on marketing. And so like sometimes it shifts, but I'm trying to focus on one thing like that. Right now, marketing is my thing. What was the question?
What is marketing? What's happening with marketing at Flightcontrol?
Okay, yes. So I think the thing that's like holding us back from the raging inferno of product market fit, like we definitely have some level of product market fit. We're growing monthly. We're roughly on track to become profitable, but we can grow much faster. I know we can. Like the market is such and the demand is such that we should be growing faster. And once people get in and they use a product and experience it, they're like, "Holy cow! Like this is amazing." But there's this hurdle of getting people from not using it to actually using it. And that's basically marketing. So It's another thing that's tough for us is it's a super crowded space. There's so many ways
Yes.
to deploy an application. And so I've been working a lot on positioning, and positioning is about how you frame your product in a way that it can be like the best at something. So for a lot of the past year or two, we've been trying to position it more like an internal developer platform, more like a big company sort of AWS, make AWS easier.
Hmm.
But I realized that we're not the best at that. There's other competitors that are doing much better at that, and there's no way we can compete with them
How are they doing it better? I mean, you still have
because
to pay this huge
because
markup,
they're
right?
using Kubernetes, which is more of an enterprise level thing, and just some of the other, like they've been around a little bit longer, and some of the integrations and things. Like it's just a different type of product that's much
Mhm.
better suited for that. Eventually, we will get there, but we're not the best at there. And so we've been wasting our time like trying to say like, hey, like we're the best at this, trying to have our messaging on our website, targeting more like AWS sophisticated users. But then we're like turning off the people who would actually be best to use our product now. And so what I've realized is that actually we are a platform as a service. We've been trying to say
Right.
like we're not, but actually we are, and we are the most reliable, flexible, and performant platform as a service. Like that combination, like we are literally the best at it. And so now I've updated our messaging and continuing to update this to frame it in this light of like, hey, like if you need reliability and flexibility for a platform as a service, like we are absolutely the best, hands down. Like there's no question. Like we're not perfect, and there's trade-offs and things, but like if you need those two things, or performance in there's kind of a handful there, but if you need in that category, like that's what we're best at.
Interesting. I want to press on like 2 points you made. One, you said you have this feeling that given the economy and given the state of things, we should be growing faster. Um, where does that come from? Where does that feeling? Does it come from investor pressure? Does it come from like everybody's like you should be growing faster, or is it more intrinsic? Like you just have this gut feeling, and if so, where? And I ask this because for me, either with my consultancy or with a job, whatever it may be, I always have this pressure to perform. Oh, I'm not doing enough. I need to do better. But my therapist tells me it's toxic. And so, like, where does that, how do you, what are the signals that indicate that to you?
The biggest signal is being profitable. So having
Hmm.
more revenue than expenses. We're not there yet. So that's important. Um, Two is kind of like the benchmarks of like how long we've been around. So we've been have had paying customers for a little over 2 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so kind of comparing that, the industry benchmarks to what's typical there. Um, so it's definitely not, it's not investor pressure. It's definitely us being like, hey, we want to, um, like we are sustainable at this point. Like with the revenue we have, we can continue to operate and serve customers and grow. But um, so like there's no issue there around like the existence of the company. But we want to be able to grow faster so that we can just like accomplish more of the vision that we want to.
Yeah. So I, I, so it's comparing, it's just a time function. Like we've been having these paid customers for this amount of time where this should translate into growth, but it hasn't yet. Is that accurate? Okay, I
Yes,
see.
and the
Um,
other thing is conversion rates. Like for the people who are coming to our website and converting to signing up and then customers. Like right now, it's on the low side. Like there's definitely room for improvement. So that's what I'm working on.
right.
Um, so it's part of it's like efficiency, like
Yeah.
examining like our entire funnel, seeing like where there's holes. So like one example was we used to have when you signed up, we had to connect your AWS account at the very end of the onboarding funnel, and we were only getting like 20% or less of people like
Hmm.
that signed up actually connect your AWS account. And so I started looking at that, and I came across this blog post talking about the psych factor of onboarding. Um, And it's really interesting where instead of kind of like the traditional view, I guess, is just like reduce the number of clicks, reduce the number of things, the steps that you have to do. Where this blog post is saying like actually all steps they're not equal. Like it's not about the step, it's about the psych level. So like if there's something that's really difficult, like so when you sign up, you come to sign up, you have the psych level of like, oh, I want this thing, it's going to be awesome, it's going to change my life. And then like each step either like boosts that, confirms that, or takes away from it. Like, oh, this sucks, or like this is good, or this sucks. And so you like there's going to be things that are going to suck, like connecting your AWS account, but you have to do it. And so it turns out we moved that to the very first thing now, and it's when they're the most motivated, and so they're like they have the most psych level, and like, okay, well, let's do this. We're gonna connect it. And then they've got the biggest negative out of the way, and now they can start doing the positive, like, oh, like now I can connect my GitHub, and now I can like start adding my code and services. And so now it's like up to about 50%. So it's like 2.5x the number of people who connect their AWS account. And most of those that connect it then go on to finish the onboarding.
That is the coolest thing I've heard. Psych level. We need to get this link and put it in the show notes, and people need to read that. Wow. So it's really like meeting the people with disappointment early because they're less likely to be disappointed, and then get that out of the way. And it's sort of like I have bad news and good news. Let me tell you the bad news first so we can be happy afterwards. That's so cool. Wow. I'm super impressed. And this is why I do the podcast. You know, people come on and share this stuff, and then I hear it and learn, and then others do as well. Okay, so it's the conversion rate on the website. You mentioned, and this the second thing I wanted to ask you about what you just said about marketing. You mentioned you initially started thinking about positioning it such that it was the better, the simpler AWS, and targeting you put it like sophisticated AWS users, right? And then recognizing actually these people, they're going to care about two-factor authentication, they're going to care about HIPAA, they're going to care about SOC 2. They're less likely to convert for us.
Or that there was more like because we're good for HIPAA now, and we're still working on SOC 2, but it's more around like Kubernetes. A lot of those want like Kubernetes, either they don't actually need it, but they want it, or they just like.
But you have ECS support, no? Yeah. But not EKS, I guess, and this is what they're going to want.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. EKS can be a virus. Like it's just this like it's infected people's brains, and they're like, oh, yes. Like with their CTOs out there that they don't actually know that much, but then they're like, oh, if I use Kubernetes, everybody else is using Kubernetes, so we should use Kubernetes. I'll look like a modern, like sophisticated CTO.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the Kubernetes support. And so this was the decision maker where you were like, you know what, we'll get there. Like you said, we'll get there. But for now, we're not going to go after this persona. We're going to go after, you said, the people who would use our product now. How do you go about recognizing that? I guess that's my question. Because like you have to be super honest with yourself, my best guess, and go like, we're going to disappoint somebody. Somebody's going to look at this and what was it called? The psych meter is going to be 0. Like they're just not going to want it. Who are those people? And then let's reverse engineer from there and build for the others. Was that your process? Was it a different process?
Yeah, basically. I reread this book, Obviously Awesome, by April Dunford, which is the tagline is How to Nail Product Positioning So Customers Get It, Buy It, and Love It. I've read it before. I went through it again, and she really lays out the information you need to know and a process to redo your positioning. So that was very helpful. Basically, it boils down to looking at your current customers, why they use you, what they value, and like your best customers, and then finding out like what makes them good and how to attract them, and then just targeting those people. And so you're the kind of the fallacy that you can fall into is like, oh, if I say X on my marketing site, people with Y that's like similar to X, they could use us as well. They're not going to use us, but it's just not true. Like they're going to use you too. Your headline and your messaging can target one thing, and people adjacent to that, they kind of fill in the blanks. You know, like So you have to focus on one thing, which is what you're kind of the best at, the frame of reference at which you're the best at, and then go from there.
This is great. Obviously, what is it? Obviously
Obviously,
awesome. Is it?
awesome.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that in the show notes. You know, you hear a lot, like when you work at a startup, especially a 5-person startup, you wear a lot of hats. I'm pretty impressed by your hat wearing. I mean, you're the CEO of this company, author of Blitz.js, doing all the TypeScript error database, all this stuff. But now you're talking to me about positioning and marketing with such competence. And really doing the work to educate yourself. I think that's so cool. I want to call that out. I wish more CEOs would do that. Maybe they do. Who knows? Maybe they just don't talk about it. But that is so cool. Okay, so you've identified this new group of people you want to position in front of. I struggle understanding product market fit because, especially in the case of Flightcontrol, because you've got paying customers, right? Does that not mean you found your product market fit? You literally, like, people are willing to pay for you. You have a market. Is it fair to say that you found product market fit? Is it, or are you in the process of discovering more of it?
There are levels of product market fit. It's one of these things that you can define in a bunch of different ways. You can define it based on retention. You can define it based on this survey of like, how disappointed would you be if you could no longer use our product? And you can also define it based on your growth, like how fast are you growing, at what revenue level. So we definitely have some level of product market fit. Like we have a product in a market and we have customers and we're growing and they're like, yeah, they love the product. Like, so there is that. But we don't have the pants on fire growth that like is evident of like the extreme product market fit. So you can call it like extreme product market fit. You can call it a raging inferno of growth. You can call it pants on fire product market fit. Like that's sort of the holy grail. Like that's what all companies are really want. And when you have that, that's where you go from like, so you can have one metaphor is like you're pushing a boulder uphill.
Yeah.
You're like pushing. Every new customer, you're like pushing. It's like a struggle to get every new customer. And then like, you start hitting the peak and it's like, oh, it's like easier. It's easier to get a new customer. You're still pushing a little bit. But then like when it starts rolling down the other side, it's like literally the boulder is running away from you. And like, you're not trying to get new customers at all. Like you're running as fast as you can just to keep up. Like servers are crashing because people are signing up so fast. Like that is that sort of rapid growth that you really want. Because that means like, one, you're getting the revenue from that, you're getting the payoff. Also, it means your product is really good. Like when you build a product, you want it to be really good. You want a lot of people to love it and like it. So we're in the phase where it's like we're like basically like flat ground. Like, yeah, we're having to push a little bit, but like not much. But it's like I want the boulder to be chasing me.
Yeah. Or you want to be chasing the boulder.
However you want to.
Because otherwise,
yeah.
Because otherwise you're in front of the boulder and it's going to crush you. What?
True.
Okay. That's so cool. Okay, so you're almost there, and the hypothesis is like all of this work with the single focus of removing barriers and focusing on the marketing and positioning, you'll get there. I'm super hopeful to see you get there. I really want to see you get there, and I think you will. And I think the listeners here would also support that. I mean, who would say no to you can deploy things on your own AWS account at cost, and you only pay for like either a service or a cluster of services? I think that's pretty cool. I would honestly do that if well, we can talk about the details after, but I would definitely do that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, so what I'm doing this season of the podcast is founder CEO season, right? We've got Matt Bilbin from Netlify, Guillermo Rausch from Vercel, a few people coming, David K. Piano from Stately, just a number of folks. This is going to go on for like 2 months or something like this. Definitely 2 or 3 months. And we're in the middle of this. I'm trying to see if I can suss out some type of like living standard of the role of a CEO and founder, because it's so wildly different. I talked to David, I talked to Steven from LiveBlocks, I talked to Guillermo, I talked to a bunch of folks, and it's so unique. And this reminds me of like the web, but back in the day when browsers didn't have standards, and it was like, does it work in IE? Does it work in Mozilla? I'm wondering if we can maybe extract some standards from the experience of all these people on the podcast while I have them. And to that end, could you maybe speak to your experience as a founder CEO? Like, what are some like salient features that keep coming back to you that have you going like, oh, this should be codified in some standardized document?
or just being a founder and CEO.
Yeah, for doing the work of being a for I can share an example like some I think I was talking with Steven from LiveBlocks, and this is not on the podcast, this is just sort of personally as we were at a conference. He mentioned like it's so important to know the boundaries between I need to get in the detail. He's a design background. He used to work at InVision. It's so important to know like when to not obsess over the design of the website and instead focus on building the business, like investor relations or positioning. And he wants to, like, he feels that pull. I need, look at this. It's off by 30 pixels. It looks nasty. I'm a designer. I want to, but he's like, no, I have a team for this and I can uniquely raise funds. The others can't, right? So that boundary for him was something that he felt was, it kept coming back. And he was like, this needs to be documented so that I would have come to this prepared if it was. So I guess that's one example. Have you faced something similar?
Yes, I think one thing for sure that um, is super hard, and I see a lot of founders mess up on, um, is seeing the truth and accepting the truth and embracing it. So the truth is our product is crap, or like whatever it may be. Like there's a lot of hard truths, and like so like for us, one of the truths is like this market is super crowded, and because of that, we can't charge as much as we would like to. And so like there are just truths of the market in your space that you, whether you like it or not, you have to embrace it, and it's just the way it is. And like there's been so many times where like I try a product or something and I'm like, yeah, it's just not good. And I like talk to the founder or whatever, and they're like trying to tell me that I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And like that's like you're not seeing the truth here. Like you have rose-colored glasses, and the only way that you can fix, like, we all start out in a bad place. Like our products suck and marketing sucks and everything. But the way you grow and improve is you look and you see the truth, you see what people are saying, and you respond to that. And so whenever people are saying like, oh, I need like SSO, I can be like, oh no, you don't, like, and just like ignore that. Like, but like there is like a balance. Like sometimes a customer is maybe not like quite right. They're always right in their experience. They might not always be right in like how that thing needs to be solved. But like whenever they voice something, like it's an issue and you need to solve it somehow. You can't solve everything. And so, it's a challenge of prioritizing. But yeah, I think that's the hard thing is just really setting aside your own, what you want to be true, and really seeking the truth and embracing it.
That is so good. Yeah, I think this is a really great takeaway for most people to just be grounded in reality, and be brutally. This was, I think, Francesco Chula was a guest who also mentioned he's not a founder, or maybe he is, of a community. Anyway, he mentioned it's so important to be honest with yourself. I'm curious. Have there been moments where you started to recognize like, oh, I'm not receiving this feedback well. I want to, but I recognize in myself I'm not. And then have you had to like put an effort, I guess is my question, to really accept the painful truth about something? For example, I've given you a lot of a hard time for this like initial deployment of things. And more so Mina than you, your co-founder. I spent many hours messaging with him going like, what is this? This is way too slow. And maybe I wasn't the friendliest, but to be fair, it was very uncomfortable. You talk about what is the not the hype, the psych meter. Mine was like negative at this point because I was like, I was definitely not expecting this. So at that point, there's the temptation to go like, oh, you're not the right user. It's fine. I guess the question, sorry, long-winded, is have you had moments where you felt yourself resisting facing the truth and you had to like talk yourself down, so to speak, And if yes, then what protocol? Like, what can we extract for the listeners who are in a similar situation?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had those, and this positioning, switching the positioning to embracing that, like, yeah, we're a platform as a service was kind of one of those things where being a platform as a service sort of has a stigma, especially with investors and things of like, oh, it's not scalable, Heroku has failed and whatever. But like the reality is, a lot of the modern market has embraced platform as a service. And there's like people that switch from AWS to render or things, you know, that's one of those examples where it's like, there's this sort of traditional like thing, but now like things have changed
Yeah,
and you have to change with it.
embracing change. Fantastic. All right, we're going to start wrapping up here, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the whole Y Combinator experience. Mainly because there's a lot of people who are interested in that. I keep getting emails that I should apply to YC, and I do, and then they reject me. So I'm like, okay, cool, I can play this game as long as you want. Not that I particularly am interested in joining YC in a big way. I think it would be cool, but if it happens, it happens, right? Flight Control joined YC. Let's maybe talk briefly about what that even means, because there's a lot of people listening who go like, "Oh, that means they give you a bunch of money and send you on your way," right? But I know it's not that. So could we maybe talk about the application, the acceptance, and then the journey after that?
Yeah. So we were trying to raise funding at the time. This was 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago. And I just applied to YC as like a Hail Mary, like yeah, just do the thing, like zero expectations. I had applied with a couple other ideas before, got rejected. But then one Monday, I got an email saying like, "Oh, you're invited to interview on Wednesday," and I'm like, "What the crap?" Like, wow. And so this was like the first week of full interviews, which means like we were one of the top picks. And so we did a mock interview with, what are you building? Like, how are you going to become a big company? Some of these, how are you
Isn't
going?
that part of the application form?
Yeah,
Like, why did
yeah,
they ask
but
you this again?
they maybe have some things that weren't quite clear, or also just the visual experience, in person versus writing,
Yeah.
um, and yeah, and then you wait to either get an email rejection or a phone call acceptance. And late that night, I got a phone call from some random number. I'm like, oh no, like this is probably YC. And sure enough, YC is saying like, hey, you're in. Like, and man, I just like went yelling and screaming down the hallway, like, we got it, we got it.
Wow. And then what happened? So you
so
got in.
so then we were able to close in. So that was 125,000, and then we were able to close another. We raised $1 million total within a week. Because of that. And so
Wow.
one thing with raising funding is like you basically just need you need the first investor to commit, and then it's much easier to get other ones. And so for that, for us, YC was that initial stamp of approval.
And that made it very easy going
Yes.
to other investors, going like, look, we're backed by YC, so like, do it.
Yep.
And they respect that name. Okay, cool. But I hear that there's like a big boot camp thing where they take you to San Francisco and like sit you
Yep.
down and teach
So
you lessons about.
Yep. Then they have a 3-month program. For us, it was fully remote because it was back in winter 22, and but now it is in person or mostly. So that was very helpful. They have a weekly program. They have events of other like successful founders come in and talk to you, and it's really like raw behind the scenes stuff that you're not going to find on Forbes or Twitter. So that's really cool. They have a lot of really great content around how to build a company, how to build a product, how to do sales, how to do marketing, how to raise funding. And you're meeting with other companies in a small group that you're with, so you can bounce ideas back and forth, have that camaraderie. You have group partners that you can get one-on-one advice from about how things are going, what can you do better, and yeah, so it taught us a lot about discipline, focusing on the most important things, and it was a really great experience. Like I got a lot more value out of it than I expected.
That's so interesting. It sounds to me like it's mostly a networking and mentoring style event, because I have to assume you're among the ranks now of like Airbnb and I don't know,
Yeah,
Stripe. I don't know
yeah,
if they went through,
yeah.
but you're with those ranks, and so they probably introduce you to those founders, and you just get to meet a bunch of folks, and and you get to use them, or not use them sounds really dehumanizing, but you get to like poke their brains, right, and get input, but also you get in connections to investors. Is it that? Is it like just unlocking you to the big world of startup?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. The one-on-one advice is helpful. The framework, the 3-month kind of focus period, is really helpful, and it's also very helpful in helping you navigate fundraising in the VC world as a first time founder doing that.
Founder.
Yeah.
Do they take equity? Like, do they own a portion of?
Yeah.
Like, okay,
so they believe the current deal is you get 125,000 for 7%, and then there's 3 that is on an MFN, which means that there's not a percent attached to it until your next fundraising round, and at that point it converts at whatever that valuation would be.
Fantastic.
So it's $500,000 total for roughly 10 to 12%, I'm guessing, and
yeah.
Then you can not raise any more after that. And there's a lot of YC companies that basically seed strap from there. So you don't raise any more. You can be sustainable, profitable, whatever, or you can go on to raise more. Like, it's really up to you.
Yeah. Given like SF and US salaries, I don't know how you would. You could have like 4 engineers. I guess that's why you're 5 people. We could maybe talk about funding, but let's maybe leave it there. I do want to ask just a final question, which is what's next for Flightcontrol? Is it just this? Is it removing barriers? Is it focusing on marketing? And at some point when you feel like those are dialed in, then then what, I guess? Because I was going to suggest then going out and doing the marketing, but you're already doing the marketing. So where does this end?
So last thing on YC, the deadline for applying to the summer batch that's coming up was this week. It's end of April, but you can still apply after the deadline. So if you're listening to this
for
right
the
now,
winter batch or
for the summer.
Oh, cool.
So if you're listening to this, you can go ahead and apply after the deadline. There's still lots of people get in after the deadline, so go ahead and apply. All right. So what's next for Flightcontrol? So yeah, we're working on all of these barriers to adoption, really refining our positioning, our marketing, working on improving docs in the website to just make it a lot more clear and understandable. Once we have all of that working really well and like our conversion rates are up, then I'm going to go out and do more content. So I was doing a lot of content earlier this year, but then a lot of the people I was bringing to the site were just falling through the holes. So now we're plugging all the holes, and then we'll go back and then start building that top of funnel again. We're also going to be working on adding Lambda support. So this is serverless function support. That's going to be really big. And there's a bunch of different ways you can use Lambda. You can deploy just an entire web server via Lambda, just like a monolithic Lambda. You can also deploy single one-off functions to Lambda. You can also deploy Next.js to Lambda, where it's like you have, multiple Lambdas for each route or whatever. And then you can also have Lambdas that respond to other events like SQS or SNS for other sort of processing. And so we're going to be working on adding support for all of those.
Wait. You can have a Node.js server on Lambda? What does that even mean? Isn't the whole point of Lambda like limited time execution and like a single stateless isolated function call? So like what I'm familiar with Lambda is just serverless functions.
Yeah.
But what does it mean? You can deploy Node.js.
You can have like an Express server. Let's say an Express server is like an API server. It has, 50 routes. And you can put the whole thing in a single Lambda. And so each Lambda is going to be serving a single request, but it could be any one of those, 20 functions. API routes. So I see. This is a way that allows you to deploy an existing server to Lambda without having to like repackage it into a dedicated Lambda.
But does it then boot up on invocation?
Yes.
And okay. So it still has the cold starts. It's basically a function, but it's express routing the function.
Yeah.
Okay. I see.
So you can do that for production. It may or may not be that great, but it can be really good for preview environments. Like right now, our preview environments spin up a container, and containers are expensive because it's running all the time. And so this will allow you to, let's say you want containers for production, so no cold starts, super fast performance, but then you can employ the same thing to Lambda for preview environments, and get very very cheap there. So
Mm, fantastic. Well, listen, Brandon. Let's leave it there. I want to take a moment and just really thank you for coming on. You've shared so much, from talking about PlanetScale and Aurora and GitHub Actions and types and errors and Next.js, and gosh, this is a real a real treasure chest of information. I know it's a big ask to have a co-founder CEO come on the show and spend this much time with us, but I want to, on behalf of me and all the listeners, thank you so much for coming on the show. I can't wait to hear the feedback from the listeners, and I hope people give Flight Control a try and really push its limits and give you the feedback that I hope you're wanting to hear.
yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining my discussion with Brandon Bayer. I hope you understood a lot about how flight control works, and by extension, how a lot of the cloud deployment models work. I hope you also took away some of the discussion around Blitz.js, Next.js, and open source, and are able to put them into practice in your day job. If you're learning from and/or enjoying this content, I'd invite you to leave up to a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. That's a great way to support the podcast. If you're on YouTube, if you'd subscribe to the channel and maybe share it on your media channels, this would also be a great no-cost way to support it. If you think it's worth supporting, of course. Nobody's trying to be coerced here, but this is a labor of love. And if you feel the love, then I'd encourage you to share it. Hey, thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you for being a part of this podcast. And most importantly, thank you for your interest in web engineering.